paint an ocean moonrise. If you're new to watercolor, or if it's your first time painting with me, you might want to check out my watercolor basics video. I go over the basic techniques, what they're called, and go a little bit deeper into mixing colors and just useful stuff like that. This video is designed to be paused, so feel free to take your time. I recommend watching a section first and then pausing it so that you have time to do your own piece and you're not feeling stressed to keep up with the video. I'm a watercolor and acrylic painter. If you like my work, feel free to check out my website. I have prints and other things for sale. I also offer private classes, so if you'd like more of a personal one-on-one course, message me and we can work it out. Let's go through the materials that you'll need. Number 1, coffee. We'll need some watercolor paint, some kind of paint palette or paint tray, a value scale. Be sure to print one out or check out my video below on how to paint one yourself. Our reference photo of what we want to paint. If you would like to paint the exact same image, you can download this picture at the link below. Some scrap watercolor paper, as well as a watercolor sheet that we'll be working on. I use a 16 by 20 size and a board that's a little bit larger to tape it down onto. Oh God. I also use a block to prop up my artboard. That way it just gives a little bit of an incline. Paper towels, need a hair dryer, some painting tape, painter's tape. And then we will need some painter's tape. Spray bottle, or if you don't have a spray bottle, you can actually use a sponge instead. Then we'll need a pencil, need a variety of brush sizes. I would suggest having like 3 different sizes with the round brushes. So a larger size can be anywhere from a 12 to 16, a medium size like 8 to 12, and then a smaller size around like a size 4. But again, just work with what you have. The last thing we'll need is a glass of water. At any point, if you'd like a more in-depth breakdown of the supplies that I use and why, the paint colors that I suggest for a more minimal palette versus a more comprehensive one, check out my video below. I walk through all of the things, my controversial opinion on brushes, and more. So first things first, let's tape down our paper to the board. Oh my God. Now we're going to work on our sketch of our painting. So if you grab your reference photo, we will start with sketching the structural components of the piece. So things like the horizon, where the moon will be, the trees, and where the rocks are on the edge. You don't have to worry about drawing every tiny detail because we'll be building off of what we have. So the main thing is if our structure is in place, naturally as you're painting, you will be able to add more leaf detail or add the whitewash texture and things like that. And the main thing that you want to be sure to draw are all of the white spaces on your painting. That's something unique about watercolor compared to other mediums is we start with the lightest colors and we work our way to the darkest. Normally in watercolor, we don't use white. White of the painting is actually the white of the paper. So you really want to protect the whites on your paper. So that being said, we want to make sure that we sketch out where the white pieces are. So in this piece, it would be the moon and the whitewash would be the main examples of that. The focus that I like the painting to be is the moon. So the moon is in the center of the painting here. It's almost on the third line. Kind of want to make the composition a little bit more dramatic. And I'm also gonna make the moon size slightly larger. This is way off. Okay, this is why you're supposed to measure. This is way too big in relation to everything else. So where it should actually be is down here. As if I would have continued to paint this piece with the trees being that massive, it would have looked fake no matter how perfect I actually executed the painting. So it's those kinds of beginner errors that you want to watch out for. Because watercolor is such a fast medium to paint, when you're actually putting the paint on the paper, that's not when you want to be making these decisions. So that's what the sketch is for. It's making these decisive choices ahead of time, so then when it comes to put the paint on the canvas, you know exactly where you're going and you're not second guessing yourself or doubting or anything like that. So now let's decide what colors we're going to use and take the next step in our painting. Now that our sketch is done, let's walk through some of the colors that we'll use. The color palette that we're going to use today will be ultramarine blue, compost blue, viridian hue, yellow ochre, jaune brilliant number 2, permanent alizarin crimson, and burnt sienna. If you're using a nicer grade of watercolor paint, it will be very concentrated. So just start with a small amount. You can always add more. Ultramarine blue and burnt sienna I use every single time. It's very versatile. So definitely we'll use those two. Compost blue I don't use very often, but this will help us bring in this sky blue. Viridian we'll use to get this turquoise and tropical ocean. And yellow ochre we'll use a little bit down here, probably a touch in the sky, and some of this whitewash in the sand. The peach we'll use for the sky gradient, just to get that pastel look. And we will use this crimson tone again in the sky. This is the color palette I would suggest. I like to start with taking the value scale and getting a sense for how dark these colors should be. So this purple up here is number 3. The blue is down here is almost this color. The moon is actually kind of like a number 2. We'll leave it as pure white. Now we're going to prepare our color palette and we're going to mix the colors that we'll use in the gradient. The first color we're going to mix is the peach tone for the sunset. So we'll start with some water. We always want to add pigment to the water, not the other way around. It just gives us a greater level of control. So we'll start using the crimson and we will add a little bit of peach to it and mix it together. And then because this looks a little too pink, we'll add just a little bit of yellow ochre to balance it out. It can take a little bit of trial and error until you get the shade that you're happy with. The next color we're going to mix is this gray tone that I use in almost every single painting. And the way that I achieved that is with ultramarine blue and burnt sienna. If you use equal amounts, you will get this very versatile gray color. The last color we're going to mix is the sky blue right above the horizon line. So we'll also use the same gray that we just mixed before, but we'll add a little bit of cerulean blue as well. This video is designed to be paused, so feel free to take a pause here until you get your colors ready and then continue the video. Now that we've mixed our initial colors, we're gonna get a little set up for this next phase. Clear the space a little bit, or painting the entire background in one shot. So yeah, I need space. Put my hair up. I'm nervous. We're gonna begin with a technique called wet on wet. First, we're gonna get our entire paper wet, and we're going to avoid getting the moon wet. The general idea is that wherever the paper is wet, that's where the color will go. And so because we want the moon to remain white, we'll avoid getting that part wet. Go ahead and get your paper very damp. It should be shiny. This gives us a little bit more time to work with the pigment before it dries and helps us prevent brush strokes and streaks. Next, we're going to begin with applying the peach at the top of the paper. It's going to be more concentrated in the top section. Carefully try to paint around the moon, and again, avoid it to keep it white. Little by little, just keep adding the peach. And once you've added the peach along the top third, we're going to add a little bit of that purple gray tone to the top. Some of this gray up here. Once we've mixed that around, we're going to use the sky blue that we mixed, and we're going to drop that into the bottom half of the piece. We're going to want to make sure that the gradient between the peach and the blue is smooth, so you might need to go back and forth between the colors to make sure it's blended well. Once that gradient is smoothly applied, we're going to go ahead and bring that blue color all the way down the paper. So I'm going to move this up and down a little bit and allow the paint to move, and what that does is it helps you out a little bit with hiding some of the brush strokes and creating a bit more of a smooth aesthetic. Okay, so as you can see, my coloring is a little more exaggerated than the image, but the values are pretty close. The pink is definitely darker, but I don't mind. It gives it a little more of a romantic look. While our paper is still wet, we're going to use a paper towel and lift off some of the color where we want the whitewash to be. Now that we've dropped in our background layer, I'm going to go ahead and use my hair dryer and set it all in place. An important concept to keep in mind with watercolor is that anytime your paper is wet, the pigment will spread. And anytime your paper is dry, that's how you'll get those crisp, sharp lines. When we were painting the gradient, we wanted our paper to be wet so the colors would blend seamlessly. However, when you want to paint something with a really crisp edge, that's where you want your paper to be super dry. So the next step is we're going to be painting these middle tones. We're going to start with painting the clouds. The first step is to mix a slightly darker version of the gray that we've already used, using ultramarine blue and burnt sienna. Now with just water on our brush, we're going to go ahead and outline this first large cloud with water. To get some of the gray that we mixed, and we're going to drop in that color in the center of the cloud. Use some water in your brush and drop in water on places you want to be lighter, and then you can drop in more pigment where you want the cloud to be a little bit darker, and just go ahead and play with the light and the dark in that way until you're satisfied with how it looks compared to the photo. And make sure you use your value scale to compare the color tones. Notice that the clouds have two kinds of edges. Sometimes the clouds will fade out softly, and sometimes there's a sharp edge. To achieve that soft fade, what you're going to do is rinse out your brush and just using water, trace along the outside edge of where you've already painted. That will help create a quick fade and achieve that soft effect. If that's not fading out as fast as you'd like, you can use some paper towel and dab at the edges instead. To create the sharper edge of the cloud, you're going to create that organic line using your brush. Play with these two techniques in different places, and that will help you achieve a realistic looking cloud. Feel free to practice this first on a scratch piece of paper until you feel confident with the concept. Then you're going to go ahead and use this technique to finish the rest of the clouds in the image. our clouds. Now we're going to start working on the ocean. We're going to need Now that we're letting our clouds dry, we're going to mix a turquoise color for the ocean and drop in the horizon line and some of the shadows of the waves. So now we're going to work on mixing the turquoise color. We'll begin with ultramarine blue and viridian, and we'll mix those two first. But because those two pigments can be very vibrant, we'll use a little bit of burnt sienna to tone down the color so it's not too artificial looking. Once you've achieved a nice tone, then we'll work on the next step. Now we're going to mix a darker version of the gray that we will use to paint the horizon line with ultramarine blue and burnt sienna. The first thing I'll do is work on the horizon line because it's making me a little nervous. So I'll just start with the hard part. I don't even see the horizon line anymore. Oh, there it is. I'm actually just going to draw it again where it's supposed to be. There we go. So now I'm not guessing. Okay, and get in a comfortable position. So I talk in other videos about how to get a straight line, and a big part of that is using your wrist. So basing your wrist on the paper, you can hold your brush upright and then you'll just move your whole arm. And it's just a much easier way of getting a consistent kind of fluid line instead of trying to sketch it. So that's a little tip there. Now, while the paint is still wet, I'm going to go back with my small brush with just some water, and I'm going to chase that line right beneath. What this will do is just soften up that line a little bit. I'm going to switch with my larger brush so it gets a little bit more water. And I'm also avoiding the whitewash sections as well. So I'm going to do just a very light wash of this blue as I avoid the whitewash areas that I've already drawn out. Here, there's a little bit of this yellow ochre and burnt sienna. So I'm going to go ahead and mix a little bit of these two. Burnt sienna could come off pretty orange, so adding just a touch of the ultramarine blue will tone it down. Oh God, damn it. So that happens if you make mistakes. It's part of life. If you are quick to get it wet and dab it, usually you can solve most issues there. Now we'll paint the whitewash using a technique I will show you. With just water on your brush, you're going to fill in this area with short strokes following your reference photo to make the pattern of the whitewash match. Then you'll use the yellow ochre you just mixed, and you'll drop in the color randomly throughout the water strokes that you just painted. This will help create an organic looking, inconsistent whitewash look without having to manually paint every little thing. If it's looking too yellow, feel free to compensate by dropping in a little bit of turquoise to balance it out. So I'm going to soften up this line, and again, what I've been doing elsewhere, wherever there's whitewash, is add little drops of water. So the next step that we're going to do is we are going to focus on the shadow of the waves. We're going to do basically what we did on the horizon line, where we're going to drop in a darker color and then quickly follow it with water to try to avoid any strong, sharp lines. So kind of the best way to create waves, or the effect of wave, like wind waves on water, isn't really with lines like this. Our brains are telling us that's the movement, but it's actually using that same technique before with the horizon, like basing your wrist so you can get a very steady sense of where the brush is, and then holding your brush very upright in the same way you do a line, like you can get a steady line, but instead of just trying to get a straight line, you're actually going to push down and create more pressure and then lift up. So that creates a natural kind of variation in thickness. And if you do that a couple of times next to each other in different lengths, that actually creates more of a water and wave effect. So that's like a little trick. The further away, the thinner the line. But let's not get too carried away with details. To drop in this bigger shadow right here. So I want this wave to be a little bit darker than the ones in the background. So in general, things in the background tend to be a little bit lighter and things in the foreground tend to be a little bit darker. So we can play with creating depth. So what you might notice here is I'm not painting straight up to the white. I'm leaving a little bit of this teal around the white. Try to leave some of these middle tones. You don't want to cover up all of the work that you've done. Okay, so while this is still wet, I think I'm going to go ahead and drop in a slightly darker shadow. As a general rule of thumb with art, try and lean into what feels a little bit counterintuitive. Not a lot, Like, don't force anything, but I think it's good to find the edge of what you're comfortable with. If you're really good at letting things flow, maybe try and lean against that a touch and try and learn a bit more control. On the other hand, if you have a hard time letting the paint be a little bit wild, I would suggest leaning into that and trying to be a little more free with the pigment and see what happens. Go little by little, because it can be really frustrating. People's minds and brains work so differently. Even though I'm telling you exactly the colors to mix your paint, I guarantee that your colors are a bit different than mine. And that's amazing. And don't feel like you're failing if it's slightly different. That's the whole point. I'm taking my piece a little bit more boring and straightforward so that you can see how to achieve that. But if at any point you want to deviate, oh my God, I got blue splatters up here. Oh my God, that's horrible. Oh God. Oh, we'll have to add a cloud. What was I saying? Lean into the mess. That actually is what I was saying, basically. Now let's move to the sand area down here. So this color, it's a little bit of a blend of this brown of the sand, and it's also kind of reflecting a little bit of this gray above it. On this part of the sand, that's where the sand is wet, it acts like a mirror. You can paint it exactly the sky color. It's a kind of a dramatic effect of making it look very shiny. I have got my gray, and I'm just going to follow right under this whitewash here. This layer down here, I'm gonna let it dry before I add this sand because I want it to be a sharp line. You can either use your hairdryer and dry it, or we can just move on to this next section. Meanwhile, this might look like it's all just a dark color, but there actually is a little bit of variation. Let's mix a dark gray. If you guys don't know how to do that by now, I will have considered myself a failure. Just kidding. The same thing, burnt sienna and ultramarine blue. We can let it be a little bit more on the brown side. We're gonna do 2 layers over here. Go ahead and just paint the whole thing like this. So I'm paying attention to the whitewash along the rocks. So I'm just being careful of those whites. Here we have a couple of splatters of white, so I'm gonna block off this whole area, and then once I'm filling in the brown, I'll just leave a couple white spots. I would leave more drops than too few, because you can always take them away, but you can't add them. So we also have a tide pool. I'm going to make a line that's not fully connecting. It's kind of hinting. Now we're going to do the first layer of these palm trees. This is kind of a similar technique to the waves. Start at the bottom and push down and then slowly lift up to create the trunk of the trees. To create a palm leaf, start at the center of the head of the palm tree and push down and then just lift up as you go out. Dry a bit, and then we'll come back with the darker layer. Now let's work on the sand. So I'm going to use some burnt sienna, a little bit of yellow ochre. the same brown, and I'm gonna create a little shadow here under the lip of the wave. This is a little trick. Get a light version of this blue. I'm gonna use this to help cover up this purple splotch. Make a couple lines like this, randomly. Maybe I'll do a couple over here so it blends. These are gonna be the shadows under little stones on the beach. I know it doesn't look like much right now, but you'll see. So now while that dries and that dries, let's add a final detail to the water. Let's mix another dark teal. When we're adding our final touches, make sure you're not overdoing it. You have to be careful not to do too much. So we have our color. I'm not diluting it very much because I want this to be really dark. And I'm just choosing like 3 or 4 places to add this color for maximum drama. Try to keep more of the detail in the foreground than in the distance. Okay, now let's add the last details on the palm trees. So I'm going to make a like as black as I can go. Equal parts burnt sienna and ultramarine blue, and then very little water. You want it to be smooth still. So I'm going to go over the palms, but I'm not going to cover all of the leaves. I'm going to make like a mini palm in the center of the palm I already made. If that makes sense? Tricks, my friends. It's all about the tricks. It's actually darker behind the palm tree trunks, according to the photo. So I'm going to paint around all of the palm tree trunks. You don't have to do this. I'm just crazy. Ooh, okay, I like how that's looking. Okay, if you're a beginner, maybe don't do this because you don't want to mess up your painting. This takes a little bit of brush control. Cool, okay, I like that. And then now we're just gonna add a little bit of texture on the rock. And I would say, let's make sure we add the darkest part next to the white. Wherever you have the most contrast is what you're communicating to the viewer is the subject and is the main part of the painting. And that's how you can control what you want the main part to be. Also by default, wherever you spend the most amount of time and detail tends to be the subject. Now the last thing is to add a couple of these pebbles. So I'm just adding like little lines or ovals. And if it's a bigger shadow, then it's like a slightly bigger line. Yay! Now we have to fix those clouds. Okay, so let's make sure our brush is really clean. I'm gonna scrub it off a little bit. Oh, look at that. For making like reverse clouds. Okay, that's what we'll do with that. Now I'll add just a tiny bit of gray to like blend in that dot. We know it's there. No one else has to know. Scrub off this blue. Oh my god, I can't believe this. I mean, I can. I do this all the time. Now we add a little more like gray. Don't forget to sign your pieces. I must say signing it is the hardest and scariest part. Make sure it's dry. If you want the easy way out, use a pencil. Okay, awesome. I'm so excited. This is looking really good. So now let's dry our piece with our hairdryer, make sure it's perfectly dry, and then we'll take the tape off. We're gonna pull the tape outwards and try to make it flat against the paper. This will help prevent your paper ripping. This looks so good. Check it out. Look at our amazing work of art. Turned out so good. Thank you so much for joining me. I hope that you like this video. It's a new channel, so please let me know what you'd like to learn how to paint. Please feel free to share your paintings on Instagram, tag me in them. I love to see people's work. Or if you get stuck, message me and I'll see if I can help you out. If you'd like more of a one-on-one coaching, I do offer private classes as well. Please like and share, and see you next time. Giving away this painting that I painted in this lesson, and if you'd like to join, all you have to do is like, comment, and subscribe. Each comment counts as an entry, and once I have 200 entries, I will choose a winner. Good luck!